What's up, YouTube? We're a couple of cunts. We're in the countryside. We're talking about terrorism. Terrorism's kind of become one of those, catch-all phrases these days, hasn't it? It's become a major preoccupation for a lot of world governments, and I mean, most people probably don't even know what it means these days.
Terrorism is a very loose word. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and at certain points as well, it's just used as
an excuse.
That and a mechanism for fear. Because if you look in the 40s, it was fascism. From the 70s, communism. These days, terrorism. These governments can put something in front of ism and say, you need to give up your civil liberties, we need to invade this country to stop this. Okay, there are cases when there's, it's called for, but at the same time as well, you've then got to think how much of what, say, our secret police or something like that, like MI6, MI5, CIA, people like that, who you think, oh yeah, they're keeping us safe. When you flip on the other side and think, hang on, is what they're doing potentially terrorism? It's a very difficult subject to get involved with.
I think the broad definition of a terrorist is someone who looks a bit Muslim with a machine gun. Seriously, these days it's getting really bad for the Middle Eastern people, because, for starters, yeah, you don't even have to be Arabic. There was that story that James Hetfield got detained at a airport for having a terrorist-like beard, which was brilliant. But I think that just goes to show the way it is. And I'm sure a lot of people have had the moments where you're on some form of public transport or in, some public place, and you'll see a Middle Eastern gentleman acting a bit shifty, and your mind instantly goes to, they've got a bomb. Purely for the fact that they're from that part of the world. I mean, you see a white guy acting shifty, the most you're probably going to think is, he's going to stab me, take my money and buy some pills. But you get, a person of that sort of descent, and it's instantly terrorism. And it's like you said, that's because that sort of idea has been, drilled into us by the news, by the media, by the government. They've given us this image of the terrorist. I think it's even capitalised, the terrorist, 2 capital T's. That's what they want you to be afraid of. And I mean,
but it's not always the case though. As the white American chap, John Walker Lynn, I think, white guy, converted to Islam, and CIA caught him in, I think it was Kabul or somewhere in Afghanistan. But it just goes to show there's always people crossing over from both sides. So it's as you say, it's very easy to get caught up in generalisation and think it is this. I mean, I've never, thankfully, come across any instance where you see someone being, viewed by society that way, where there's this level of fear. I think it's important we try and educate each other to stop that from happening. But as you say, it does happen, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, terrorism is not actually about race at all.
No.
Anyone who has the capacity and the will to cause destruction on a large scale in an unorganised fashion, I guess, is what a terrorist is. You've got to have that sort of distinction. But I mean, it could be, someone, a black guy in South Africa, who's...
Like those miners protesting in South Africa. Okay, yes, it was peaceful to begin with. Some of them, I believe, did have like machetes and stuff, but they were then, a lot of them were gunned down by the police or whatever forces were there, and then they decided to charge all the people there, even if they weren't doing anything, with the murder of their fellow miners, which they've only, within the last day or so, dropped those charges, which just sort of makes you think sometimes terror legislation, I know that's old apartheid laws they've got there, but some of the terror legislation in this country, it does make you feel a bit worried when it's like, we can detain you for however long without charge. It's sort of like, hang on, habeas corpus here, come on.
Yeah, but the law is very slack when it comes to that sort of thing. They said they were going to close Guantanamo, but I'm sure it's happening.
Oh no, that's still there. That was something Obama promised to get rid of. But no, even if he closes that, I mean, there's always been and always will be. Even like countries like us are always like, oh, human rights, human rights. We've got secret torture camps all around the world. They exist, and we'll do business with people who will torture people. We might not necessarily get our hands dirty, but there's always someone who'll do it. There was an interesting case a few years ago, very divided opinion. There was bombings, I believe, in Madrid, And I think they originally were trying to blame it on Basque separatists, and then I think it later came out as being al-qaeda linked. I'm not entirely sure. It was some sort of offshoot group, and they bombed them because they'd gone into Afghanistan. And then people, there was this massive uproar, and all the troops, the next government that got in was completely the opposite of what the previous government did, because they went along and said, right, fine, we'll take all the troops out if you elect us, and they did. And then there was this kind of uproar thinking, well, hang on, have we just let them win there?
Depending on who's in charge, does very much impact who the... it's like we were talking about this at work just the other day. We were talking about the IRA, back in the 80s and 90s. And that shit's kicking off again now. I saw in the news that there was a couple of days,
stopped,
really.
It got quieter, yes, but that just makes you think how long that's been going on, and how how simple that is. I don't want to gloss over things there, but you've got Protestants and Catholics for the main part.
At the end of the day, that is what it's about.
That is it, yes. When you go, and there's one language, pretty much everyone's speaking English, apart from a few people who are going to speak other stuff, but it's pretty much one language and two religions. If you go somewhere like Afghanistan, where you can trace a lot of current troubles too, you've got a dozen or so ethnic groups speaking 20 languages and at least half a dozen or so religions. How on earth are those guys ever going to get along fully? I mean, there's, even in multicultural societies, but, aren't Western, Malaysia is a good example, Singapore as well. A lot of different cultures there. They have done very well as of recently. Okay, yes, there are still human rights abuses, but, there have been massacres in those countries up until, pretty recent times, quite scarily recent. And it just makes you think, well, all right, we've got all these people out in Afghanistan. What's going to happen when we take them all out?
Well, I mean, the whole reason, really, that we're talking about this topic this week is because in just a few days it's going to be it's the 11th anniversary now of, the 9/11 attacks.
Which is possibly the biggest and most well-known terror attacks ever. I mean,
I'd say so.
Certainly of our generation and stuff.
I think everyone remembers where they were when it happened. I mean, I've got the very distinct memory, and it was 11 years ago now. But
it was a Wednesday.
I still remember very, very clearly walking down the high street. I'd just come out of W.H. Smith's, in fact. I was looking at magazines, waiting for the bus, the school bus, and someone came up to me and said, the World Trade Centre's been hit by a plane. And I was like, fuck right off, you're having a laugh. Got on the bus, thought no more about it, got in the car when I got back here, and my mum said, shit's going down in America. Got into the living room. I knew shit was real because none of the channels had what they were supposed to have on. It was news everywhere. Literally watched the whole thing go down. Got home, I think, just before the second plane hit, and we were up until about 11 o'clock at night watching it all go off. I remember going into school the next morning, and our insane mate Carl, just the first thing he said when he walked up to me in the quad was just, Bin Laden, bastard. It's like, you've really hit the nail on the head there, mate. Well done. I mean, yeah, shocking state of affairs. And I mean, even now, over a decade later, it's still pretty raw for a lot of people, I think. I mean, obviously we can talk about it, but particularly the Americans and those people who had friends and family in the World Trade Center.
I mean, it's a raw subject for the Middle Easterns as well, and people further afield, because, they're still feeling the after effects of it. The thing I find funny is a lot of what was happening in Afghanistan, a lot of the people who were there causing the trouble at this point in time are part of the old Mujahideen.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't know, they were the guys who were fighting the Soviets in the 80s who took over Afghanistan. The Americans gave them loads of money, loads of weaponry.
And training.
Yeah, and they basically did exactly what they're doing to the Americans now, but did that to the Soviets in the 80s. Then there was another group called the Northern Alliance who had a fight with them, and then they've kind of buggered off, and it's all gone round in circles again. And Afghanistan is a very nice country, but it's got a very sad history. The fact that every, 30, 40 years, or maybe, if it's lucky 100 years, some colonial imperial power will come along, have a go at it, and then, pull out when it's not profitable for them anymore.
Well, watching Rambo 3 these days is a bit uncomfortable because he's in Afghanistan helping the Mujahideen, and you can think, hey, that's sliced alone helping al-qaeda. It's one of those unfortunate associations, I suppose.
It is very weird. I mean, Lawrence of Arabia was the first person that came up with asymmetrical warfare. What his idea was, if you can't get tanks and stuff to blow up someone like that, use their weaknesses against them, because World War I, the Ottoman Empire, which was the Turks, pushed into quite a lot of what was then Syria, which is the old mother country of the Middle East. And he realised the Arabs there, they're not so good at face-to-face fighting like that. What they're good at is raiding. So what they would do is they would run in really quickly in the night, slit through throats, blow up supply lines, stuff like that, which is what they're using to this day. It's what was used by the Viet Cong in Vietnam. It's what's been used in Afghanistan. Everybody's been doing it since. We've got all these fantastic weapons and stuff like that, but if you leave a roadside bomb or if you hide in amongst civilians, they can't shoot at you, and that's how they're taking advantage of this.
Basically, if you want to look at it in a certain way, Lawrence of Arabia was a terrorist. We've been a couple of cunts in the countryside. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe and share. Check us out on Twitter and Facebook. If you didn't enjoy this video, just leave a bitchy comment in the comments section. Don't plant a bomb in my house. Feel free to suggest a topic for us to talk about in a future episode, and we'll see you next time.
And remember, you don't have to join a terrorist organisation to get your views heard. The best thing you can do is just shout at your parents and play your music really loud.